Well, here we are back for another round of Talking Hymns with Shane and Tim, and we are happy you are joining us. This is exciting. We had a fun week in our first get-go talking about A Mighty Fortress is Our God. Any thoughts, any other thoughts come to you in the last week about A Mighty Fortress is Our God?
Well, that's funny you should say.
Okay.
I told you being Lutheran, we studied Luther so much. We had read his biographies and, Did you know that he married an ex-nun?
He did.
And do you know how she got out of the convent?
I do not know that.
She was smuggled out in a pickle barrel. It's true.
Yeah.
At least that's what I read.
Yeah, Luther's got a lot about his life that's just is like stranger than fiction.
I know.
Yeah, for sure.
I know. But yeah, it's evidently to just get out of the convent, she had to hide in a pickle barrel and be taken out.
Yeah, and isn't part of Luther's story like his affection for her is sort of what drove him out of monasticism?
I think so.
Yeah.
And the biography I read of hers was something like Kitty My Rib. Her name was Catherine, I believe.
Oh,
and
interesting.
He called her Kitty My Rib.
Well, I've seen paintings of them, and yeah, they're both lookers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. Well,
so this week we're coming forward a little bit in time, not all the way up to right now, but we're going to be talking about a pretty well-known hymn, "Spirit of God, Descend Upon My Heart." Any opening thoughts about this hymn, Tim?
Well, stark contrast to what we talked about last week. We had the very driving rhythm, both Lutheran and traditional, of A Mighty Fortress, the strong language, the battle hymn quality of it. This is so the other side of the spectrum. It is so quiet, reflective. 300 years later, it sort of reflects also the text writing of that time, the language, the music itself, sort of Victorian, easy listening.
Yeah. One of the things that was interesting as I was reading about this hymn, because it's written by George Crawley, who is Irish, and he was someone who was prominent in literature, writing lots of poetry, and a lot of this was published really later in his life. And so I think even this hymn, they were saying this hymn first appeared in, I believe, 1867, which is, I think even might even be after his death.
Well, I think they put it in a collection before he died, but they didn't use the tune that we know.
Yeah, and so, it says like George Crawley wrote this text on Galatians 5:25, and it was first published in 1867 in Lyra Britannica. That's interesting.
1867, I think.
Yeah.
No, I guess not. I was going to say that might be when Atkinson wrote the tune that we know.
The Atkinson tune, and this is what I was going to drive to here, was written in 1870.
Yes.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I guess, and I think in me as someone who has written music in the past, I often think about song composition as the way Luther did it, as we talked about last week, where Luther wrote both the lyrics and the music. But so much of what we see in our hymnal is actually a marriage of sorts. And this is one of those songs where Crawley wrote these lyrics, but the Atkinson tune came later, which is an interesting thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and a lot of times, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but hymn books back in the 19th century, middle to end, often would just be texts. and they would say, sung to the tune of.
That's right. That's right.
And so, because people knew those tunes.
Yeah, and there's still remnants of that in our current hymnal, because
sure.
if you're looking at a hymnal and you look at the top of the song, it will often mention the name of the tune.
Right.
And if you're someone that's deep into hymn knowledge, in some ways the names have enormous meaning, because you just, I know that tune, and you think right to it.
Right.
But if you're not familiar with the hymns, that might seem a little strange.
Well, we tend to identify hymns by the text, the first line generally.
Yeah, first line, exactly. Yeah. That is funny, because a lot of hymns, I guess maybe technically don't have a title. It's more just they're known by their first line.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
But the tune names do vary, and they're interchangeable.
And we talked about that a little bit, is that this is a hymn that, despite this, and we can get into this, has of a reflective tone, can often be sung to other melodies, which almost completely reorient it. But let's talk first about the meditative tone of this, because this song is all about the Spirit. Tell me a little bit about what you feel and hear musically there.
Well, the wish for the Spirit to descend upon my heart, wean me from earth, blah, blah, blah. Just this prayer for guidance and for settling, for centering. The music is so supportive. It's very predictable, static. Static does mean predictable, right? Staying the same. Yeah.
There's no modulation. Yes. There's no. Yeah.
Well, actually, the funny thing is, it does modulate within the first two phrases.
Oh, interesting.
To a new key, and stays there. I mean, secondary dominant, stays there for a little while, but then goes back to the relative. Well, we were doing it in C major, but the funny thing is, the hymns generally end melody-wise on the first scale degree, tonic. Mm-hmm. This one ends on the fifth.
Oh, interesting.
Which is sort of an unsettling ending. You don't feel like you're going home. It doesn't feel like you're driving to tonic.
Yeah, I wonder if that's part of what this song seems like a song. It propels itself back into itself.
That's what the theory is.
Which has over time, and because of the calmness of the music, has almost creates a meditative state.
Correct, and it leaves it unfinished. That ending on the fifth, it just feels like there should be another verse or something, and it's.
Within
nice touch.
Within pop music, you would say that would be end on the 4 chord off the root with a 9 in it. It just has this sort of dangling or ending on a suspended chord, which just makes you go.
But the chord does go back to the tonic. It's just that the melody hangs on the fifth. And it's an interesting blend.
Yeah, and so this is a song that, because it's talking about the Spirit, would find itself in use in Pentecost, in the Pentecost season.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's another thing about the melody, and that the melody that we use for it, Mokum, I believe it's pronounced, uses what we call musical painting. For the descend upon my heart, it's a bunch of steps going downward, descend upon my heart. So there's like a word painting with the music there, which wouldn't work for some of the other tunes that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I want to interject here now before Tim plays Spirit of God, Descend Upon My Heart, we'd be really interested in knowing hymns that you are interested in, hymns you would love to hear Tim play and do interpretations of, or hear us talk about sort of its history and meaning. We really would love this to be an interactive sort of experience for you. I know Tim's got stuff we're planning in coming weeks, but there's a lot of hymns and there's a lot of weeks, and so there's a lot of stuff we can do, and so we're excited to hear hymns that you're really fond of. Hymns all over the map, new hymns, old hymns, hymns that we don't know where they come from, all those sort of things. We'll throw some in and just see what happens here. So here's Tim. Tim is going to play for us a verse of "A Spirit of God, Descend Upon My Heart." this is a song you're going to play something for a prelude here. Can you tell us a little bit about this and your own experience? What we were talking about earlier about how there's sort of been a revolution in how hymns are played and interpreted over the years.
I'm old enough that I've seen it, and I don't know if I had stayed in Wisconsin and stayed Lutheran, would I be aware of this? When I moved to the South, to Nashville, that was an eye-opener for me for church music, because I heard these arrangements that to me sounded like movie music, nightclub music, major seventh chords. I mean, I just thought, this is not what we would do at home, taking anthems and hymns and dolling them up with fancy chords. Mm-hmm. Is this appropriate? Am I going to get in trouble for this? It was a revelation. I think, back in the 70s, what? Was it the 60s that we had Vatican II, where we started hearing folk masses and guitars?
And in the mainline tradition in the 70s, you start having this sort of liturgical reinvention, which is an interesting thing to think about. Churches like ours, which tend to fall much more on a liturgical end in the spectrum of churches.
Correct.
Churches like ours weren't always this way. Presbyterians in the 40s and 50s, and so we're often very sermon dominated. The liturgy was not as developed as we have now. And so music is also a microcosm of some of that growth and the diversification of it.
That's true.
Yeah.
And this particular setting, the one I was drawn to, is a friend gave it to me, told me about it. And it was one of those that I thought, I don't really particularly like the hymn, but this is such a nice setting. And then I started delving into the hymn and reading the text and all that. And I thought, this is a different way of saying it. It's got these very thick, dissonant, jazzy chords. It's still reflective and very low-key, but it's just a lovely reimagining, I think, of a pretty standard harmonization made jazzy by the man's name is Joe Utterback, and he is a jazz man.
Well, the jazz part is interesting, connecting particularly with the spirit, because I think spirit and jazz have always seemed synonymous to me, because of the amount of improvisation and interpretation and imagination required in the moment. And to me, that speaks of what the spirit is doing in our life. And I know that has been embodied in liturgical traditions, that Pentecost Sunday and those are a time where jazz elements are more thrown in, because that's certainly there. You got the color red, you have the celebrative atmosphere of all those things, and they all seem to work together. So it seems like a really natural connection, even though it wouldn't have sounded like that to you when you first got here from Wisconsin.
Right. Well, and again, the melody is untouched. The melody is totally intact, straight as it can be. But man, those squishy chords underneath, they're just, it's a whole reimagining.
So I do have to warn the viewers that this week there's not fancy footwork, but there is fancy socks. And so we'll get some good sock footage, but the feet won't be dancing as much.
Footage, I like
that. But there won't be the dancing feet per se this week. But I'm really excited to hear this, because this is one of those hymns that falls into the category for me of, I couldn't necessarily even tell you the first line, but it's a melody that I've known forever and ever, and I'm interested to hear this interpretation of it. So here it is, Tim, with this interpretation of this week's hymn. One last little bonus content before we head out today. We want to talk a little bit about how this hymn has been put to alternate tunes in the past and how you can be a little playful by hymns often do that.
Well,
Yeah.
and this is sort of like Hymnal 101, but at the back of every hymnal, generally, there is what they call a metrical index. And the metrical index takes the text, counts the syllables, and puts them in numbers. This particular hymn that we're talking about today is a perfect 10. It's a 10, 10, 10, 10. Spirit of God, descend upon my heart. Mm-hmm. So each line has 10 syllables. So in the back of the hymnal, you can look at a metrical index and say, what other tunes work with 10, 10, 10, 10? And some of them are surprising. So you could take this text and set it to, which it was originally set to, the tune for Abide With Me, Fast Falls the Eventide. That was the way it was first sung when Crowley wrote it.
Okay.
Then when the tune came along
tune came
later,
along, yeah.
that the one that we know came along later. But one of the other 10, 10, 10 hymns is God of Our Fathers. Which I can't imagine
It's a totally
taking
different
that
feeling.
text
Yes.
to that kind of a driving.
Yeah, that has those driving triplets and the
Triplets
horns.
and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
totally different song. Yeah.
So, Spirit of God, descend upon my heart. Da, 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 da,
Dun,
da,
dun, dun.
da.
Yeah, I couldn't. That's totally different feel for the song. Yeah,
Yeah, but
I'm
it is
sure. I'm sure
fun.
it could. I'm sure there's something that could be learned in game from that. You just maybe the surprise itself would do that, or that the empowering nature of the spirit instead of the calming. I don't know. That's interesting.
It's more just a parlor game for organists.
Yeah, that's
I think.
true.